Secretary General Sri Lanka Press Association, Mr. Lim Kooi Fong, Buddhist Channel Malaysia, Mr. Raymond Lam, Buddhistdoor Hong Kong, to please take their seats on the dais. We have the panelists and moderator for our session 2 seated. This session will focus and deliberate on the themes of a need for a Buddhist voice in Asia, developing a Buddhist media network across platforms. I now hand over the proceedings to Mr. Rajiv Mehrotra. Uh, Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to another important session in this very important conference. I think the sort of great challenge and the struggle whenever we look at ways in which we can use the media and when it is a group of people committed as deeply as we are to a philosophy and to a possibility, is really to find the space and the detachment to move beyond a mere supply push. Because when we talk about the need for a Buddhist voice in India, in the world, in Asia, in whichever part of world we wish to focus, because the Buddhist community now is growing rapidly around the world, is really to ask ourselves the question, what is the need? And in what ways can we analyze the need, understand the need, and to respond the need? One of the great challenges in development support communication has been that organizations and agencies, whether they are public broadcasters or they're governments, have tended to focus on really usually not even need or the demand pull, the supply push, but really to try and put out into the world what we feel we want the consumer of our media communications to know. Now, that's an extremely dangerous, wasteful enterprise, because unless we fulfill, I wouldn't even say need, because we don't always go reaching out to what we need, because frequently we're not even aware of what we need. So, for example, we may say it's very important for people to develop an understanding of other Buddhist traditions across Asia, and there is a need for that. So I think that it is sort of the horrible Buddhist idea that we all want to exclude desire. So I think somewhere we have to look at ways in which we can juxtapose what people want, what people would like, what people think they need, but may not be conscious of that. So I think it's extremely important that in our deliberations, we both try and articulate and anticipate what is it that we as Buddhists ourselves, what is it that we ourselves would like to um, receive, not because of the official positions we might hold or the institutional context within which we have this conversation, but at the purely human level. What will give us satisfaction and gratification? So I think that is a very key aspiration for a discussion, because it's only from that can we really move forward to the forms and structures and techniques and processes that we can adopt in order to develop, as we say, a Buddhist media network across platforms. Because I mean, I know I'm repeating myself a zillion times, because ultimately we need some kind of, and this really is a need, a structure, a system, a process that has at least a modicum of a business model, that has some viability, so that it is not eternally dependent on supply push grant driven structure. And across platforms, there are a number of my colleagues here who have experience and are working with public broadcasters. And this really is the predicament of public broadcasting around the world. So that's just a brief. I mean, I have some ideas myself, which I will, time permitting, inflict on you. But meanwhile, to set the ball rolling, could I invite a very veteran newspaper reporter, Mr. Pipope. He's a reporter and a documentary filmmaker. He has an interest in teaching the general public, and has worked with mobile journalism. He's now a deputy director general at Thai PBS, in charge of the news and program department. And so here we already have an agenda that he represents, teaching. So perhaps you could locate that in a larger discourse.
Okay, thank you very much, Rajiv, and thank you so much for having me here. Well, what he said, it's what I ask myself every day, what the public needs, and what is the justification of myself getting syntax. Thai PBS is not funded directly by the government, so we more or less independent. We got money from liquor and tobacco. That's a certain act. So whoever smoked a lot and drink a lot, help me. But but the point is, yeah, it's not that easy when you get funded, because we really have to give the public a justification of the value of your existence. And um and we i i came to the position during the time that we all know the media disruption. The television that I started out my career with turned out to be not the second screen but the third screen. So I'm in the realm of the transmedia, you know, where we don't do storytelling anymore, but what we do, we creating story world. But and I was working hard trying to think what the public needs, and I just want to go with my slide. So may I go up there? I have 10 minutes, and I'll be brief. It's a story about I. There's something very unusual took place in Thailand media landscape. Okay, everybody know the Thai Cape Rescue incident, but the thing is, during the incident, there also another crisis on top of the children crisis, that the media crisis. It turns out that the social media was very, very, very active at attacking and bullying the Thai media. That did what their journalistic value, investigative news, probing the mayor about the operation, turned out to be something they call bad taste and not wanted by the public. They felt that the public, they felt that the journalism as we know it, that means accuracy, um, impartiality, directness, speak truth to power, became a problem. They felt that Thai journalists sabotaging the operation, which is totally a feeling. I know a lot of fellow journalists in this room say, well, when you speak the truth, then you must hurt a lot of people because sometimes people are not, uh, what do you call it, ready to face the truth. But what it turns out, we before that, we did the regular reporting as everybody else. But at the moment when the public turned to be really angry at Thai media, not, it's funny, for Western media, they've been seem to be exempt of that kind of anger. But for Thai media, we were under scrutiny very much. And it's part of us is to blame because a lot of news story in the beginning was really tabloid and yellow, talk about superstitions, talk about, how you have to do this kind of sacrifice in order to get the children out or whatnot. You know how the media sometimes like to play on that. And when things got really bad, it turns out that the social media start to say that Thai PBS staff did something right. And what they did is that they're not that aggressive because they're being trained to be mindful. And then this is not a construction. It's something that we've been trained. Dr. Kalinga can testify to that. That we start to think that what is our role and what being mindful is about. Being mindful is not about being polite or patronize the viewers, but being mindful is be able to think about others as human beings, not only as news source. Mindful is about understand the big context of the situation, not only racing for the news. Because as we know, when there's a media disruption, the main change that happened is that the economy of media wasn't accuracy anymore. The economy turned to be economy of attention. Whoever posts something that get the most attention get paid. And my question at that moment is that are we gonna get paid if we're being mindful? And a lot of people in the newsroom thought I was wrong. Say, well, you're being mindful and you're gonna be too slow. You're gonna be too polite to ask real question. We need real someone to take care of these Thai officials who gonna do something bad in the operation. That's how we in the developing country. I mean, I use this word. I'm sorry, but I don't want to euphemerize it. I think that the word is still true. We in the South sometimes have to keep a constant eye on our officials because if you let them have their way, there are many times that we foul plays going on, and we got the hunch that the operation probably not as efficient as it's supposed to be, and that's why it turns out that most of the Thai media wearing this, what you call it, investigator suits and was blamed for doing the job that they're supposed to do. For us, we think, well, we're going to stick with the truth, but being mindful, as we have been trained, should help for the public to understand. Being mindful is also about understanding others, that, okay, the public needs to know how we get the news. So we start to talk, the thing that journalists are not trained to talk about is that where do we get this information from? The transparency of the process has turned out to be part of the news reporting, more or less as a footnote. And we start to blur certain things without being asked by the government. What we blurred the SEAL Navy operators because this SEAL thing, a lot of people will call it, hey, that's self-censorship right there, you know. But for us, it's not that because we just felt that, okay, these rescuers who come from the Navy, who are SEAL operators, SEAL the Navy, they also do intelligent works. And if their identity being exposed, they're not going to be able to function anymore. This is somehow what we call contextualize it. Of course, in the newsroom, there's a big debate. Should we do that? Should we? What was it? A kind of cop out? But when we do that, people start to make a comment on the social media. This is very interesting. Is that we no longer, at least in Thailand, we no longer the master of the game. The public, follow us really closely, not us alone at Thai PBS, but other station as well, and then making judgment of this journalistic standard they're supposed to be. And when the news got so large, we decided that the way to go, this is our general director, she said that, well, our mission is no longer about, it's not journalistic alone. At this point, we have to make sure that no one's get harmed. The children, the relatives, the people who in the operations. So we start to do a lot of explanation, much more than in the beginning, which was investigation. We start to elaborate on the stories, how things happen, and at one point, the public got into the point of hyper alertness. They started to accuse, look at this station, they're doing that, look at that station doing that. It turns out that for us who applying mindful method, we get pretty good ranking. I, I have 3 more minutes. It turns out that we started out at rank 17. And by doing mindful, and mindful is not copped out, mindful is giving details, but contextualize it, have more explanation involving the core of the story. And we use this word that we be with them, we be with the viewers. We try to understand what you said, what they need. And I think the what the bottom line is the public needs somebody that they can trust. It comes down to be so simple. And it sounds corny a little bit. They don't want people who have all this dramatic thing. They don't want someone who may be true or not true. They want someone they can trust, even though that person is slow. Come the last as the last information source, but it's someone they feel that they come without any hidden agenda. So it turns out that our ranking went up to 5 from 17. And from the public poll, the Thai US turned out to be number 1, only short 3 weeks. Now we came back to number 14 already. But it goes to show that being pay attention to the words that the people respond, which is sometimes some old time journalists like me too who think this is really not the way that we should do. Listening to the people, understand them, and know that by applying like this concept, it's about we call it samadhi, that's mindful being here and there. Slow down when you do rescue operation, many times you do like really quick cut, really exciting thing. We slow it down. We think about elderlies because television in Thailand, according to research, 70% are elderly people, and what they're watching it can be really stressful, especially in the case that the children all die, which were really unlikely, as we know. So we start to prepare, them to understand. We talk about the Four Noble Truths, and we use dukkha. Uh, you all know this very well, as a way of telling our news stories, where it starts and how it can be solved. And we said that at this point, we still do our journalistic work, but we have to be their friends, their companions, someone they can trust, someone they feel that can give them the solution. We even prepare some chanting because a lot of and comics because the football team names Y Boar. So we do something really lighthearted, something that kind of heal, the people because the stress was so high and if the news turn out and you be callous about it and you came out and say, well, all the children dead and this is, how a lot of people gonna feel really bad. So we prepared this kind of a clip. We playing the, but well, at that point there's this certain chant that I believe that will help the kids. So the whole nation chant, and we as a TV station in the news section, we use that also. Okay, and so there was the good news. So just last slide. I know my time's running out. So when we look back at our operation, it's quite totally different from ABC, American Broadcasting Corporation. As a lot of people know, they're probably the winner from this thing globally because they got Thai government let them interview the children. The Thai media themselves didn't get to do it because we're supposed to be the bad guys. That's really, you talk about decolonization. I think my government did once. Well, but anyway, what we did at Thai PBS, we used this really method. Actually, I cannot explain it, but this is how we plan our news. We look at some false news, fake news. We define the Abijah and how we gonna tell that we believe we still do investigative journalism, but we use Kalamasutra as a way of investigating. But we not only investigate, we looking for solutions too. How the information that we get from this will solve the problem. Okay, and for us, the general idea, the mood and tone of journalists, it's embedded with loving kindness and compassion, which I don't know. A lot of people accuse me of being soft, being sold out, being not a proper journalist, but it turns out that the public, I answer your question, sir. I think that's what they need. Someone they can trust and someone who knows that, who can understand others and let go of their ego, because journalists have this ego of proving that I'm the first, I know the deepest, and I'm the one who slay the dragon. But we didn't do either of that. But how come we turned out to be number 3 in a short 3 weeks? That's my story.
Thank you. That's very illuminating and interesting. Where we come from in India, working in a very diverse secular space, where for anyone to admit to using a philosophical framework of this kind as one that circumscribes media strategy or communication policy would be certain death. But I think that even if looked at in a secular vocabulary, without looking at the vocabulary of Buddhism, there can really be no argument. In fact, an applause for your approach to broadcasting. And I think that, well, if there are any questions, please raise your hand and have a shot at it. No. Well, may I pose a question to you? This addresses a very valuable insight or perspective on the process, and also the idea that the audiences need to trust. I think are extremely valuable and unarguably so. But I mean, just going back and locating it in the context of what we're seeking to achieve here is to develop a Buddhist media network and then dash across platforms. So I think there are two ideas here, and to develop a Buddhist media network. So if you could just speak for a few moments. And again, I want to celebrate you. Obviously, this is both mindfulness and media discipline, that if you have 10 minutes, you finish in 10. And I would applaud that. But I think it would be interesting to hear your reflections on what this media network, what might it seek to achieve and to do. We'll come to platforms in a bit.
Me? Yeah. Well, I think now we more or less in a kind of crisis. If we are not being accused of fake news because we are not one of those social media influencers who do fake news. But I think a lot of us are being accused of doing poor journalism, that our journalism is no longer relevant to what the public needs. And I kind of really admire the lady in green, what she said about the American history of journalism, how it started. The world have changed so much, but I don't think we changed fast enough. So to answer your question, sir, the network is a kind of platform that we try to connect alternative ways, or you use the word evolution, right? Evolutionary way of making mainstream news. I don't think that we will think about being alternative Buddhist platform. I think it can be integrated in the mainstream. I hope that it will help not only us in the East or in the South, but help the world itself. And a lot of people think I sound like a dreamer, but I think this is right to the point that the importance of developing a network is to foster a more relevant kind of journalism to the context of global climate change, the economic unjust, the really extreme relationship between many ideologies. And I really like the morning session when they said that it's somewhat, some people say, well, it's philosophizing journalism, which should be about facts and figures. But I think perhaps it's time because the problems that we reporting nowadays, it's so complex and it's not one-sided or even two-sided anymore. It's so diverse that perhaps our way of the methodology itself, the diverse approaches itself, will be part of the solution. That's why I think the network is so important. And of course, since it has to be on multi-platform, so what I'm looking for is not online. It has to be on ground, on air, and online altogether to creating this kind of different kind of discourse.
So perhaps just like we have engaged Buddhism and we have different sort of labels or different levels of kinds of activity, perhaps we could define a structural, philosophical basis to what we call Buddhist journalism, which would manifest across different platforms. Could I invite Mr. Sisira Wijesinghe from Sri Lanka? He's the media advisor to Commander of the Army in Sri Lanka and Secretary General of the Sri Lankan Press Association. Is it challenging being a media advisor to the Commander of the Army?
Thank you, Jess. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mehrotra. My fellow panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it has been really a pleasure to be in front of you for a very constructive dialogue where the Asian stalwarts are assembling together, of course, from the media perspective. Well, this is quite a challenging this thing, as the Buddha himself once preached. I quote, "The mind is the forerunner of all defilements," unquote. Now, judged by all what we discussed since morning after the inaugural session, all defilements are being discussed. And particularly Dr. Harlinger very clearly articulated how these defilements are working and how quite a few other Indian scholars who were here in the previous session as well very clearly explain what is happening with the world of journalism. I mean, this is no difference in my own country alone. So therefore, I would like to, first of all, thank you so much for billing me as a contributing speaker to this forum, which is of great significance. And this is an effort directed in the right direction, because we have never been invited or we have never been heard of having such a type of forum before as far as journalism is concerned. Just 3 days, 4 days prior to my departure to India, that is somewhere around 14th of this month, a sudden debate erupted in our Sri Lankan media that was based on one particular sentence that has been used by a certain section to produce a comic drama It was called Tharuvan Saranai. If I interpret into English, uh, get the blessings of the stars. In our Buddhist rituals in Sri Lanka, particularly, all the monks as well as various other clergies always invoke blessings using various types of their own rhetoric, or rather their own way of blessings. In Buddhist monks who are preaching right through the country, all the time use the two words, Theruvan Saranai. Theruvan means the triple gem, which is symbolized the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Now there is a move in our own country. They dropped one letter from the front and are trying to completely distort that blessing into a real joke. Now, this is what is happening in the world of journalism, not only in Sri Lanka, but I know elsewhere as well. That is why I think once Mao Zedong very clearly predicted soon after their problems, the journalism should be development oriented with the flavor of humaneness and concern for the uplift of the public. Are we doing the same thing as it today? That's $1 million question that lies in front of us. So how can we go beyond this point? Now, as per the discussions in the previous sessions, as well as the concept paper rightly pointed out, the need for a coherent, collective, and non-distorted version of Buddhism is much more required than ever before. Again, coming back to my own country, there are efforts to give various distorted interpretations to the whims and fancies of various forces out of the country in such a way the Buddhists are getting more and more puzzled, and they have gone to the extent of even infiltrating the community of Buddhist monks, which is again coming under the so-called commercialization of journalism. So that's another aspect that we all get to be very cautious in the coming years. It might be today Sri Lanka, tomorrow elsewhere. And the message that originated from this blessed land of Mahabharata, I need not repeat, will remain as a universal phenomenon which has been respected by each and every one of us. So it is our responsibility in a way to bring this element of mindfulness without getting into defilements and trying to practice our attention towards the use of words as a learned skill. Now, how are we going to do that when it comes to the question of the tribe of journalists? That is once again a big challenge that lies ahead of us. Numerous examples, as I told earlier, are found all over the world where the humanness, the humanity, and also the particular moral values that have been sidelined due to this yellow journalism and various type of malpractices being executed by various interested parties. Let me place a few observations and initiatives that can be put into practice if we all, the IBC and Asian Buddhist leaders, gather together and work together in the right direction. Now, during the part 2 in the previous session, number 1, a golden initiative was discussed in order to sort out modalities of launching a Pan-Asian Buddhist communicators training program, a move taken in the right direction and with specific attention. And my thanks go to Dr. Kalinga Senivaratna for taking so much of troubles on behalf of all of us. He very profoundly understood the core essence of what has to be done, and also he used a very nice terminology: decolonization of the mentality of Asian Buddhists, which is a unique thing that should be adopted as a priority of concern. That is very much prevalent in my own country as well as in, I'm quite sure, in India. Now, we still feel that we are subjugated, and also we are still not on par with the Westerners. That perception is extremely active and very rich even in my own country. So to begin with, I first and foremost, you see, would like to recommend that there must be a brainwashing towards this end. And we got to select certain sets of journalists, budding journalists, who can be trained to this direction. If not, we would not be failing getting what we really want to do. Now, Dr. Kaling was quite right when he was talking about these training programs that have been staggered and also, or rather, phased out in such a nice manner. But then comes the question again: to whom are we going to give these lectures? Whom are we going to train? Whom are we going to be our beneficiaries? We have a string of questions that follow. So therefore, there must be a parallel mechanism through which we got to select the right people for the right job. On one hand, almost all electronic and print media give pride of place to Buddhism early in the morning as well as by 6 o'clock in the evening in our country. But on the other hand, the same media barons contribute largely to promotion of violence, hate, greed, and conflict, devoting more than 3/4 of their prime time in our TVs, social media, radios, of course, to a greater extent in the print media as well. So how come these two parallels go together? When the youngsters sleep, after 10 o'clock, they start all intellectual discussions. So no one would be there except for very old people who are just confined home. And all others who are going to work the following day will go to bed by 10 o'clock. But all the TV channels, of course, my good friends are here, but I think they, from the bottom of their hearts, they do agree with what I say. They go on talking about intellectual matters and also the scholarly talks. But there is hardly anyone to watch them. And it goes on till small hours of the day, till about 1 o'clock at night. Now, from 6 onwards till about 9:30 in the evening, which they regard as the prime time, not a single child will be able to sit with their parents and watch the TV. Now, this is what is happening. So, how do we come out of this, this trenching ditch, or rather, from this deteriorated situation? How are we going to, more importantly, how are we going to sort of say, launch a challenging media network to cover all these countries in our region, which are predominantly Buddhist? And how come we go to the downtrodden at grassroots level? So these are again matters of concern that should be taken up during the discourse of this follow-up of this seminar. And also, please note that unless we go to some kind of modern day, the most interesting and rather more sophisticated modules of publicity, I don't think that we will be able to carry the message of the Buddha to any of our beneficiaries, or rather our partners who are expecting our message across. And that has to be again launched with the spirited team, because the more that spirited message does not go to the budding youth in our societies, they will feel they are deprived and they will become slaves to the mobile phones, the IT, that's it. As you all know, with the expansion of the YouTube, etc., the enormous amount of interest has grown across the globe. And in our countries, this has been very unfortunately and sadly turned to a very bad side, where a lot of them are going into watching sex through the YouTube. Now, these defilements, as the Buddha say, can be used for our own betterment if we are intelligent and if we are making the budding youth the more educated lot, rather than just a lot of fools. And the life stories of Buddha, for example, as documented in the book of Jataka Tales, the tales of 500 of previous births, can be very seriously considered to begin with, to popularize the ideas of Buddhist values by translating them into various languages, and also even to the by going to the extent of producing stories through cartoon and also various teledrama series. And that's a good, I believe that's a very good start for us to rethink and redesign the modus operandi that is very much needed as it is today. And also the going to the sphere of social media, it has, we must not look at it with an adversarial, like one of the previous speakers said, perspective, but it should be tapped to the benefit of the poor Buddhist community. And also at the same time, we have to regard it as an indispensable tool in the modern day. So therefore, I appeal all of you to think about these aspects in a more better and a more concrete manner, and the parallels, or the modules, or rather the paradigms in which we can work before we start our project and take it across these nations. The voice for Buddhists, to be very precise, if it attached, or if it is referred to my own country once again, is in a very pathetic situation. I believe many of my colleagues would agree that though Sri Lanka has a Buddhist community of about 71%, we are still lagging behind in many projects. So I strongly support Dr. Kalinga's view that there must be very concrete training measures that have to be adopted to begin with. Of course, again, I should remind with that decolonization of the mentality. And establishment of a Buddhist media network across the region is certainly a formidable task. Or else, we could, to begin with, we could very seriously consider of some kind of collaboration with all other medias, Buddhist medias working in different of Asian communities. For example, Sri Lanka has the popular Buddhist channel, the Buddhist, whose Director General is right now with us. At the same time, we can think of, like my colleague a couple of minutes say, how we can combine programs to begin with, rather than investing huge sums of money for a particular one station or a social media network. Of course, with the social media network, we are much more benefited because it's less expensive and also it's quicker. So I appeal once again to this panel of scholars to consider these views very seriously, because it is the media which is held largely responsible for diverse social conflicts. And also they have become a very big challenge to the stable peace, not only in Sri Lanka but elsewhere as well. In coming back to a few words about my own experiences as the media advisor, the commander of the army in Sri Lanka, we are right now faced with another facet of a challenge, which is very formidable and which is extremely difficult. That is to get a good project being done by the army troops, particularly in the conflict-ridden, the previously the conflict-ridden northern and eastern part of Sri Lanka, into the media. Before the war ended in 2009, there was enormous euphoria among the journalist community. Even they were so particular about going into the battlefield in camouflage uniforms with the fellow troops. But now, when they are building 100 houses in the north for the poor, there is hardly anyone who would like to go and cover it and carry a story. Now, this is another aspect that we need to approach or tackle. We are moving towards a period of reconciliation in a very bigger way in Sri Lanka after the present government came into power in 2015. But the media not at all is giving the due recognition and support for the nation building tasks of the army, for example. And with a lot of difficulties, we are getting the message across. So having said that, I believe this forum would continue with scholars like our chair, as well as Dr. Karling, and also so many others whom we met. And we wish, on behalf of the Sri Lankan Buddhists, we wish good luck with your program, and let us resolve to develop the awareness among Buddhists and the awareness among the Buddhists about the proper journalism, and let us take this message forward. Thank you very much, and Ayubowan.
Thank you, Mr. Wijesinghe. So much food for thought, so many wonderful and important ideas. I pretty much grew up in the media. I did my first radio program when I was, 9 years old, and been in the media a long time. And I've struggled with trying to understand, say, the success of media enterprises that work. And what do I mean by work? Make an impact, whether it's the kind of impact we like or we dislike. I think there are principles that we can learn from what advertising does, from what social marketing strategies do, what Hollywood and Bollywood does, what Mr. Donald Trump does. At the very least, Mr. Trump has pushed up the sales of the New York Times and the Washington Post and the viewership of the CNN. And I think the essence and the key to that is repetition, is understanding the consumer. And I keep feeling that we are the converted talking to the converted. And we're using our vocabulary to develop a communication strategy with our vocabulary for a potential consumer who does not understand our vocabulary. I do celebrate Pipope comments, and as I do a friend, is that we have to look at the process. And what is unique about the process that our network or our media strategy could bring, to me, seems the core, the seed on which we will need to build. And to see how many seeds we can sow. And when they sprout, maybe there'll be enough trees to provide a shade to some of those who seek it. And I'm a great admirer of my friend Carl. I haven't known him with any other name. And I think he did a wonderful documentary, which I only recently saw for UNESCO on Buddhism. And his efforts of just trying to do a radio feature program across Buddhist countries in English to reach out to. I think that was a extremely valuable seed. But I think somewhere we're all collectively responsible. We didn't nurture that seed. We didn't water that seed. And here was a tangible, concrete seed waiting to sprout. Nothing happened. And so I think as we sit at the drawing board, and which is what this exercise in so many ways is, it's extremely careful and crucial that we are mindful, but it's not enough to be mindful, because the media, we have to recognize, and we cannot escape this. Media is art, it can be mindful art, but it is also an industrial product. It costs money. It needs instruments of dissemination. It needs for us to formally, someone to go out, no matter how large the sample size or how small the sample size. We can't just sit here and say, look, with the right motivation and mindfulness, we will put out our message into the universe and it will be received. We have to look at and understand, and I think it can only come through formal scholarship. If I had any influence on the IBC and I would endorse, Carl's efforts, I think the first thing we need to do is to commission a study that provides some data, an empirical, research-driven basis on which we can drive the choices that we must finally make. We all have, ideas. So do I have a million ones, and I will propose one at the end of this. I'll have my 5 minutes, use my 5 minutes in the sun to do that. So I really wanted to make a plea to all of us in this room, all of us around this table, that the first concrete thing would be let IBC facilitate. We contribute to our foundation, small sum of seed money to get someone like Carl to do a study. What is the need? What are the structures that are available to us? What are the existing resources that are available to us? Can we identify, key 5 partners concretely who are willing to put some of their money where their idealism and thoughts are? I think then we can sort of discuss, navigate recommendations and suggestions and propositions that come up to evolve a blueprint. And this takes time. And I think that Carl already brings to it great hands-on experience for trying to develop this. Because I think that what the advertising industry does when they want to persuade and to create a need for something that you don't really need is, they go out and figure out. They talk to people, they do random sampling, and they try and analyze patterns of behavior and the nature of superstitions and prejudices. And as communicators, we all know that communication involves the message, the messenger, and the recipient. And so we sort of get caught somewhere in the middle of this. And I think it's important for us to understand that when we are going to be moving on to sort of more discussion on the social media. And I think that the social media is this vast canvas. It's everything and it's nothing. Because of the challenge of curation and the challenge of curation by someone you trust. So sometimes to create a Buddhist network could be as simple as creating a curated space and inviting anybody to submit content, because the production of content is being increasingly democratized. We no longer have to create content from a central space. There are a zillion videos that are posted on YouTube. Today, television channels, I mean, if you haven't seen, I'm a great admirer of a chap called Kumara on NDTV, very hostile to the government, but nonetheless, I think he's taken the democratization of content to very, very significant. I mean, I may not agree with everything he says or does, but the technique of democratizing access to content. So what it really does is he invites people to send in news stories on video, shot on Samsung S9 phones. He then curates them and then uses that material to further his particular point of view. Now, we can also be looking at models where we don't have to look at national broadcasters and large amounts of money, but merely a curated space where anybody from any organization, and I really feel passionately, we just shouldn't look at this as reaching out to Buddhists. I mean, after all, we Buddhists, and certainly if you're a Mahayanist, are looking to serve all sentient beings. So I think that we should be looking to reach out to everybody, drawing upon our Buddhist heritage of mindfulness and the structures and the way we look at reality and the way we process it through the framework of the Four Noble Truths. But it doesn't have to be held out to your face. Look, I'm processing this through the Four Noble Truths, because then that becomes a resistor to communication. This is Buddhist. I will not receive it because it's Buddhist. Now, when we're like trying to reach out to a large Buddhist platform, we should be coming to it, in my sort of modest view, from Buddhism, but not let the vocabulary and structures of Buddhism and Buddhist ideals and thought manifest in your face. Because we are looking to seek something much larger than the promotion of Buddhism or Buddhist ideals per se. And I think, one of the aspirations will need to be that we should expand our reach, our aspiration, not just to the decolonization of Buddhists in Asia, but the decolonization in its essence, wherever it might exist. I mean, any successful media product draws and starts upon the experience, the lived experience of its creator. But we will have to extrapolate from our experience as colonized Buddhists to people who are colonized everywhere. And unless we think expansively and start with planting some of the seeds, which I think we're all collectively responsible that Carl planted and didn't really sprout, except to the degree that it has catalyzed conversation. So I'm sorry, I just carried away. Let me introduce the next speaker, Mr. Lim Kooi Fong, who's the founding and managing director of a television Buddhist channel. So please. Yeah, 10 minutes ago. It should be more resonant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also to the organization, IBC and Vivekananda International Foundation for the invitation. I would like to basically go through what we as the Buddhist news media faces when we apply mindfulness in our daily work. So this presentation is very experiential. Okay, it says that the website is there, www.buddhistchannel.tv.
Is my bald head in the way?
Okay. And it is established in 2001. In fact, just after 9/11. Okay, just after 9/11, we established this site. And before I go in, I have to tell you the target audience of this Buddhist news site is not for Asians, it's for the West. So what we did was, we said the West have a skewed idea of Buddhism, all right? And we said if we compile news articles from Asia with a team that has a deep understanding of Asian culture and Buddhist tradition, we can formalize a website, like Mr. Chairman Mehrotra said, a curated site where we can actually present something that is more, non-conflicting. An example here, there's a gentleman here from Brazil, Mr. Sasaki here. Okay, we discovered each other through this site here. Okay, we became some sort of acquaintance. So, and Acharya Shantum says, his friend, Mr. Gary Gag, who is the author of the Idiot's Guide to the Beginners or to Understanding of Buddhism, he discovered this site, and then through the articles, he discovered me, and I sponsored his trip down to Asia, and he began to discover even more of the Buddhism that is understood in Asia. I think this is very important because Buddhism is a tradition from Asia. The roots is here. But when Westerners come and do research, they study Buddhism in the ivory towers through research, all right, through secondary information. And they write wonderful books, and we read them. And we read them, and then we learn from Buddhism from their writing. All right, so it's very ironic. Buddhism comes from here. The roots is here in India. But I learned from Buddhism from, books written in London. Seriously. All right. So this is a dichotomy, and I was thinking maybe we should do something about it. So in over 16 or 17 years, we targeted, we push our satellite towards the West. We focus on packaging news, Buddhist news, and send it to the West. We tell them this is the version of Buddhism that is practiced in Asia. And for some reason, it's working, all right? I met many, many friends from the Western world. They are more willing to accept some of the traditions and all the culture that emanates from this continent. Now, before I go on and tell you how we use mindfulness, all right, in our day-to-day work, I want to emphasize one thing. Dr. Kalinga talked about colonization. The word mindfulness is a colonized word. The actual word, how do you use this? The word is sati. All right, the original word for mindfulness in Pali language is sati, and it comes from the root word sarati. All right, sarati, and sarati incidentally means memory. Mindfulness, if you look at it from the linguistic point of view, is just circumspection. I'm aware what's happening here. There's no relation to memory. All right. But the word sati in its original Pali form has the root word remembrance. So on one part, it talks about circumspection, but it has at its tail end an element that is linked to memory. So the whole word for samasati in Buddhism is actually mindfulness. There, the second one here. Continuously remembering something, being mindful of something, continuously keeping something in mind. Now that's the definition of the Buddhist word sati. And if you look at the Sanskrit meaning of sati, which is smriti, all right, it denotes a similar connotation. Now this is a basic, if you look at the study of linguistic, Pali linguistic, you find all this meaning here. Why did I say that, mindfulness is a colonized word of sati? Because the word mindfulness came from the Pali Text Society, and it was coined by Thomas William Rhys David, who's not aware of Buddhist. He's just a Pali linguistic. And because it was written by this white man, first time he translated sati to become mindfulness, and here we are using it, in our everyday language. Now, why am I saying this? It will be very apparent why I use the word sati instead of just mindfulness. Okay. Now, in the Buddhist context, right mindfulness, samasati, is one of the 5 powers because it actually empowers you to break through the darkness of suffering. What are 5 powers? Concentration, wisdom, effort, faith, and the fulcrum is mindfulness. We need these 5 elements, all right, in order to keep our practice constant, to break through that the thickness of our ignorance, so that we can break through suffering. So it's one of the 5 powers. Is actually a tool to help you in your enlightenment process, right? And sati is applied in vipassana meditation, anapanasati meditation, which is concentration based, and the satipatthana, the Fong foundation of mindfulness. So it's actually an active element in the meditation practices. Now, when we have this sati as one of our key element in our approach to application in journalistic ethics, you find like this. Okay. So our core competency is actually objective observation and recollection. It's not just a phrase, because it's a phrase that helps us in the design of our database. I am an information architecture. So as I work with my programmers, I'll say, no, let's just do a search engine. That's a typical way. Let's find a database that's easy to manage, all right? But what's the philosophy behind it? How do we use the philosophy that we understand, in this sense, mindfulness or sati, and turn it into an engine that meets this objective observation and recollection, all right? And a more important thing is that when we present the news, we have an obligation. We apply circumspection with a moral basis, because sati has a moral basis. It cannot be just be observation just for the sake of observation. Cannot be mindfulness just for the sake of mindfulness. And that's why we have a lot of these so-called mindfulness training programs is coming from the West, making a lot of money out of it. Mindfulness without moral basis will make you the best sniper in the world. You can kill, excellent killer. Navy SEALs are using mindfulness to become the most effective killing machine in the world. Do we want that? No. All right. So if we become a very good, very mindful journalist, but without a moral basis, we find the worst news to report, create the worst conflict we can ever think of. And what we have? A ruined world, right? So clear circumspections become power, bala, when coupled with clear comprehension of whatever that is taking place. You are mindful of what is taking place, and you know exactly the consequences of your mindfulness. You are very clear. You report it this way, this will happen. You report it that way, that will happen. You are very clear of the consequences. And therefore, we take a position. Do you want to report this way or that way? That's how we train our people. Okay? So when we turn this objective observation and recollection, this idea, this philosophy, all right, into a system, what happens? Objectivity becomes data and information architecture. We build the architecture system using Laravel or PHP, and that system contains all the objective data. Okay? And then we build a search engine. When we key in a key phrase word, we start to connect this data and this data, and then it can provide the context. All right? And of course, recollection. The database contains a lot of data, so much. We can scroll down up to 20,000 since 2001, 20,000 articles. You can see over time a certain phrase, what happened to this incident over time. You can see the type of event that take place, okay, through the search engine. So you can see that based just on the philosophy, we built a system out of it. All right. So the system is not ethically free. The system has a moral ethics that is based on the philosophy that we believe. How do I'll give some example before I call it off. I'll call it a day. How many of you know about the incident of the Western Australian Buddhist order who ordained nuns, and because of that issue, there was a schism, all right, with the Western Buddhist order in the UK, all right. I know both monks, Ajahn Brahmavamso and Ajahn Sumedo, and when we tried to cover the story, I had to talk to two set of monks. And these two monks are very well known, very well respected in the community. And I knew if I were to cover this story, if I would be witness to a schism. It was very obvious. When I covered this way, someone said, "Oh, you are for this monk." Okay? When I cover this one, I'm condemned. "Oh, you're against the nun's ordination. How dare you? You're not modern enough. Yeah, you're a old-fashioned guy." So either way, I cover. I'm going to get killed. All right. So what do? I talk to my staff and say, "What shall we do?" Then he asked me one question: "What would Buddha do?" And you know what? We decided to apply noble silence. We kept quiet for 2 days. It's like the yellow card or the great card or whatever you call it. We kept silence for 2 days. And we announced on the website, "Hello, everybody stop shouting and fighting, We're going to keep quiet for 2 days." And surprisingly, they said, "Yeah, that's a good strategy." Things got cooled down. All right? But after the third day, when we put up the news again, and all the walls started to come back again, And I decided, I witnessed a schism. You cannot change the fact. But what happened was, we smoothened out the process. The breakup is going to happen anyway. But we let it happen without creating so much bad faith among the two groups. Okay? So when we had this situation, then we said, can we apply to other areas? So we tried applying. For instance, the Rohingya issue in Myanmar. I've been called when I supported the Rohingya. I when I published certain articles that supported the Rohingya view, I've been called extremist Muslim agent. Okay? And when I write on the Burmese point of view, the liberal right of America calls me a shameful Buddhist. So what am I supposed to do? Okay? So the situation was that we did not apply noble silence in this case. We applied, like I think one of the, yeah, you said it, right? We explained the background history of the issue. Why the Rohingya community is rejected by the Burmese community in general. Where else, there is a big Muslim community in Burma itself, in Myanmar itself. That's happily living there. How come the Muslims, that kind of Muslim is happy, but the Rohingya is not? Then we found the history of the Rohingya community not wanting to be integrated into Burmese society. That was a big issue. And mind you, Myanmar has a very diverse communities, and they have a constitution. So if the Rohingya gets away, imagine what about other communities? If they do that, Myanmar will be destroyed, definitely. So that's the historical part. But once you put in positions like that, it's very difficult to reconcile. All right. So we have another one, the saffron revolution in Myanmar. So what we are saying is, the moment you have a philosophy or an idea, which the morning speaker, Acharya Guru Murthy said, don't turn the ideology, focus on the philosophy. And then you become inclusive. From the inclusive manner of thinking, you create systems and processes, all right, to manage the data that's in the system. You build great search engine so that you can contextualize the data, the storage of the data, all right, and it comes up with a narrative. From there, you make a decision. Do you go this way or do you go that way? So I suggest that if you were to build up a system, right, a Buddhist news network, all this element has to be there. So I'm giving you some ideas. And through my experience, some work, some may not work. But at the end of it, you have to face the consequences. There's no right or no wrong. There is no good or bad. Because the world there's no such thing as clear black and white. Plenty of gray areas in all around. But if you have a good system, I'm sure we can find a common ground. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was most illuminating, and I have no idea what right or wrong would really be, both in the manner in which you proposed reporting the Rohingya crisis and the schism in the community. I mean, I honestly don't know. This is not a British euphemism when you say, I don't know. It's not a form of disagreement. It really is a very, how do I put it, a very challenging call to make. And I think that also that it's been very revealing for me to listen to the mindfulness approach, because as a student of the Dalai Lama, while mindfulness has a very important role in the process of studying and the practice of Buddhism, it doesn't have the same emphasis. I think the emphasis is in some ways, well, it depends on how you interpret mindfulness, and I think different Buddhist traditions interpret and use a different vocabulary, to understand and process it. And I think that's a very important fact to acknowledge, that in the very use and understanding of mindfulness within Buddhism itself, or many other ideas, when you look at Shunyata, you even look at the Four Noble Truths, there is a huge diversity within Buddhism itself as to how we approach this and how we take responsibility for our choices, to what degree surrender. But time's running out, and so if I could invite the final speaker, Raymond Lam. We have 10 minutes, so you have 9.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for paying even the slightest modicum of attention, as I'm the last speaker on a sleepy afternoon. But I was just, I could talk about all sorts of things, about a new model for journalism and Buddhism, possibly building on what everyone has spoken on so far. I could also probably discuss even, our website's founder, Mr. Robert Ho's old days as a newspaper owner, and how his style affects and influences my own way of reporting. But after listening to our last speaker's final points, scandalous events and things like that in the Buddhist world, I thought I'd turn up the heat a bit and use a very difficult example in everyday life in my newsroom and explore how our editorial decisions really reflect our methodology. So there's actually an additional point there, in the sense that we need to look clearly at what Buddhist journalists do on the ground to shape our future theoretical approach. So theory affects praxis, but praxis also affects theory. So just on that aside. editorially, Buddhistdoor Global has been facing some very difficult dilemmas. We have eyes to the West as well as in Asia. We aim to communicate in the highest standards of English, global Buddhist news. So we do not, while we recently have turned more of a focus on Asia and China, we do not neglect the West. We consider Lions Roar, Shambhala good friends. So that's why there is a little bit of a. I do have my own personal questions about specifically siloed approaches to the media, but that's another story. Onto the problems that we face on an everyday basis. A prominent Thai monk has been recently jailed for charges of corruption. The head of the Jogye order, which I know well in Korea, has resigned over allegations of corruption. In North America, the Shambhala organization is collapsing as we speak, thanks to widespread allegations, many of them quite serious, concerning sexual abuse by its leader, Sakyong Pham Rinpoche. And closer to home, in China, Venerable Xue Cheng has resigned from the all-powerful Buddhist Association of China, the main religious liaison body with the CPC, the Communist Party, over similar allegations made in a disclosed letter. Now, I'm not going to talk about what those allegations are, but building on what our previous speaker was talking about, what does an honest Buddhist journalist do? I've worked for many years for Buddhistdoor, and I believe in serving the Buddhist community by delivering good, honest news. And you are faced with this list, scandal after scandal, and which, by the way, both Buddhist and secular news media are picking up on. Now, if you don't talk about any of them, people aren't stupid. People will know that you are deliberately avoiding the issue. If you talk about all of them, and worst of all, if you talk about them irresponsibly, then you fail as a Buddhist, you fail as a mindful reporter, you fail as a journalist who is careful about what they're reporting. And this is the loss of trust in the media has a lot to do with reporters and press professionals jumping on scandals because it's going to get them clicks. It's going to get them this whole list of scandals for any media baron or editor who wants only clicks and ratings. This is a bonanza. They could just focus on this rolling, 24 hours or in every edition of their magazine or paper. And, the ugly truth is that I think they get plenty of readers or hits or views or whatever. I'm not here to present necessarily an answer to the question. I'm giving you a real life example of what a Buddhist journalist faced just in the recent weeks, and what other what I'm not necessarily saying our choice was the right one. We've made plenty of choices. We've had plenty of dilemmas. We've had plenty of things that we need to make a call on. What would you do? This is this is an honest, open question that I think is worth exploring, because it's a practical question that will one day come across many reporters here or commentators or media professionals. Now, one way of dealing with such an issue that is relevant to what we're discussing here is, what's the journalist's civic duty? Development journalism, building a happier society, moving in a more constructive, restorative methodology. We can contextualize scandals and see how does it affect the overall body sangha, right? So it's easy to make a big fuss and criticize and blame all sorts of parties in, for example, the Venerable Shui Chung scandal, right? But it is absolutely true that the state authorities moved in quickly and said that religious ethics had been violated. Now, one of the reasons why many of us get angry at Western media is because they don't tell the full story. They tell the scandal, and then they go off on their own and analyze the fallout and analyze how badly this affects the Buddhist community and how much corruption there is. But at the same time, now, not all of us are. This is not a political statement, but what happened with the Venerable Shui Chung scandal was that the state authorities overseeing Longchen Monastery, which I'm sure maybe some of you might have heard of, they came down hard and they released a statement along with the Chinese Buddhist Association of China that if these allegations are true, then they do damage to the Dharma and they are not acceptable. Because from a wider perspective, there is nothing worse than lost faith and lost trust. We journalists want people to trust us, but we also want people to trust in the messengers and the representatives and the spokespeople of the Dharma. And when those people violate trust, then there are ramifications. So, on a practical level, we took a twofold approach. In an editorial that I published concerning this scandal, you look at that, you make it clear that these are only allegations. These for some of them, they have not been proven, and if they aren't proven, and if they turn out, worst of all, if they turn out not to be true, then we have a different story, and we have another kind of editorial direction to follow. But if they are true, then one needs to look beyond the individual and look towards the community. How does this affect the community? And my judgment, my personal judgment, not anyone else's, is that it affects the community pretty badly. And if we take a communal approach, as we do with a more kind of inclusive journalism, then my editorials will reflect that kind of opinion. That harming the Sangha, causing distrust, causing dissension, all that kind of thing is unacceptable because it turns people away from the Dharma. So responsible reporting can take many different roles, and I'm not saying that my approach was necessarily the right one. I have to make calls every day on the angle, the framing, the way I report it, the way I comment, my analysis, my opinions, my op-eds. But what do we do when we're faced in the heat of the moment, like our previous speaker? He made the decision to practice noble silence, which we've done for some scandals. For others, we haven't. We've just released a news piece, being just objective and stating what's being alleged, not what's necessarily happened. It's not easy. And when you're in the heat of the moment, you have no time to, sit down cross-legged, or maybe you do, sit down cross-legged and meditate for 5 minutes or 15 minutes and reflect carefully on what your objective is and why you're reporting it. Now, I've already gone on for some time, but I would like to say that one very helpful method that I have used over the past couple of years is referring to the Noble Eightfold Path as my model for doing the best kind of journalism that I can do, especially for a Buddhist website. The Noble Eightfold Path actually is applicable to every industry, every discipline, every aspect of life, and it doesn't necessarily have to be framed as the Noble Eightfold Path because it's numerically structured that way. But how do we practice right view in journalism? How do we practice right livelihood? So, for example, is it I want to investigate something suspicious and I'm barred? You know, I'm an investigative reporter. Do I take on a different identity and hide my identity to go in to report and secretly film something? Now, see, these are, I don't have a right or wrong answer, but these are things that a mindful journalist doesn't grapple only with the story. He also grapples with how he's going to tell it. And I think if there is one thing that I would believe is extremely important and relevant to all of us media professionals and Buddhists, is the necessity of looking at the ethics of how we practice mindfulness. Because mindfulness, as we discussed, mindfulness is the first step, a sharp kind of awareness of the situation, the context, the circumstances. That's basic. But then you're conscious of the ethics that you're exercising, and it might and you will always find different answers, even if you might have a consistent basis of principles. I hope I haven't ruffled too many feathers, but I thought giving some real life dilemmas will sort of raise some attention as to the stakes of telling stories. I mean, these are very serious matters. Now, sometimes one methodology might be to promote all that is happening well, and we do that all the time as well. Good news, restorative news, and one might call feel-good news and commentary. And you'll always have a balance, at least from my approach, since our website is non-sectarian and adopting a pretty general approach to the world of Buddhism and society. But what happens when your newsroom gets hit hard with difficulty? I think that's when your ethical mettle is truly tested. And it's not that, and by the way, the right call often is to maintain noble silence. Who's to say it isn't? It really depends. It's context specific. It's context specific, and you also, when you decide to report on it, you need to situate the individual event within the broader stream of how the river is flowing. That's how I would put it. So I hope I haven't rambled on too much. I think any questions about Buddhist journalism, I welcome any feedback or responses. Thank you so much.
So, well, we're 3 minutes over 4 o'clock, but if there are any questions or comments that anyone from the audience would like to make, they are welcome, provided they're kept brief. So, 1, 2, yes. Ajiz Ahmed.
I just want to get more clarification.
आपने तो जूता उतार लिया अपना.
आराम से. Mr. Lim, I think you explained the etymology of the word so beautifully. That is the sati. Now, in the Eightfold Path, it is not only sati, but it is samma sati. So, do you really see the difference between two? And can you just explain why Buddha used the word samma when sati itself is enough to really say that the things which look into is wholesome?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. That's a very good question. I believe, if the Buddha did not add the word sama, to all the Noble Eightfold Path, it goes both ways. All right, because the Sama has to be applied in a moralistic sense. If you look at the what call this the threefold training, Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Okay, the Noble Eightfold Path is followed on this context, right? I think it's three Sila, three concentration, and then two mindfulness. 8. Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Sila, Samadhi, Panya is a progressive approach that we take. First, we build ourselves ethically. Then after that, we purify the mind. And with that purity of mind and the control of the body, and then we use that wisdom, the arising of that wisdom, to break through our ignorance, and then we seek our enlightenment. So it has to be a direction. It has to be the right way. If you use it on the wrong way, it goes the other opposite. Okay? So as I used the word just now, mindfulness. Mindfulness is a double-edged sword. US Navy SEALs are using it, training, because they learn from Japanese samurai Zen Buddhism. They use it so well. They kill so silently. They are the most efficient killing machines in the whole world. Western meditation teachers are making a lot of money, especially psychologists. They pick up this word meditation, all right? They give it fancy names, maybe like transcendental meditation, and then apply it in a corporate setting. And what they do, they teach managers, corporate executive officers to become highly efficient money makers. And they make so much money for the company. And who suffers? The workers. The workers get pittance. They make the shareholders rich. They become rich and become famous. And if the corporate goes, in the limp, what they do? They jump to another corporation and they start the whole process again. And they destroy a lot of workers. Okay? So mindfulness is a double-edged sword. But the Buddhist mindfulness, there's no other way. You use it for your own personal development with the end result of attaining enlightenment, if that is your goal. If not, you just become a very good ethical person. That's about it. Okay? Do I answer? Thank you.
This is in reference to Mr. Sisira's talk. Thank you, Mr. Sisira, for a wonderful and enlightening talk, and very nice to hear about. I think not only in Sri Lanka, but almost in most parts of the world, that the media behaves in that dubious manner. Sometimes they glorify the things, and by evening again they drown the whole world into some sort of with a very serious, sensational, and worrying type of situations. And so then what is the reason for this kind of behavior among the media people? So regarding this, just I want to share with you one the sort of anecdote told by none other than the former American President John F. Kennedy. Some of the members in this hall, they might be knowing about it. Okay, when John F. Kennedy was the president of the USA, he was invited to be the chief guest at some media function somewhere in 1960s. Then in his address, what he mentioned, sort of exhortation he did was, you are all great editors, media barons, but you all take care of yourself. But you don't worry about the very, people at the lower rung in the media edifice. They are these journalists. So then he quoted, I want to remind you, if you don't care the journalist, take care of journalists, and what he will create a sort of havoc to the world. I will narrate one incident. He was telling
So
about
you have to keep that really short. Yeah,
Jay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, just finished like a minute
Yeah,
or so,
yes.
please.
He was telling about Karl Marx. There used to be a journalist in London, and he was European representative for New York Herald. And Marx was having a bigger family and children, and the amount of salary he was being paid very little. And he was simply requesting $5 increase in his salary, and they were not at all minding. And ultimately, what he did, he went disgruntled, and he created a sort of a new theory that that communism came in and it divided the whole world. So such kind of havoc with the disgruntled
Thank you very
the
much.
media people they will create.
Thank you, sir. You know, I can't help feeling that just like people say that we get the politicians we deserve, we finally also get the media we deserve. And I think we need to feel responsible, whether as people who consume the news and people who generate the news. And I think that the great sort of possibility, the great hope for the future that we've had four wonderful panelists. And all we can do is that acknowledge that we struggle, we engage as to what is right, with what is right, with what is possible. And the greatest threat to the Buddhist idea of the media is certitude that what we do is right and that it is the only way to do it. And I think so long as we can approach our engagement with the media, both as consumers and readers, with a critical mind and a sense of humility, we are on the right track. There is so much in the world that needs to be overhauled and reinvented that, you know, eons of lifetimes is what this might take. And you know, evolution was mentioned. I said a lot of this has to do with evolutionary biology. You know, plainly, from the time that man manifests in evolutionary terms, a manifest volition and moved from being a reflexive animal, he has confronted this challenge. And I think that the strength that I see as an aspiring Buddhist, I'm a very imperfect one, is that I think the great quality that Buddhism has demonstrated is that its incredible ability to adapt. You know, we celebrate Hinduism, but Hinduism has assimilated different cultures and different civilizational influences and religions and philosophies. But I think the great strength of Buddhism has been its ability to travel out and be assimilated. And I think that that comes from many factors, but that certainly includes its willingness and commitment to investigate the true nature of reality, the true nature of truth. And somewhere, as it evolved into the Mahayana traditions, to say even truth is relative. And I think it's that openness, that ability to assimilate, is why sort of Pew Research tells us today, contrary to what you would expect, that Buddhism is really, in percentage terms, the fastest growing, inverted commas, religion in the world. And interestingly, that this category are not people who formally declare themselves as Buddhists, but in the United States and census data, and they are now coming up with the idea of friends of Buddhism, which means people who may not necessarily formally embrace Buddhism through whatever rituals or lack of them, but feel open and receptive to what they can learn from Buddhism. So I think we need to sort of navigate this with that sense of humility, openness, and engagement. Who knows what the truth is? Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful learning experience for me, and I thank my panelists for a great time.